Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to try and be quick because I'm looking forward to the coffee break as much as I'm sure you all are. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I should start with a disclaimer that I am not a specialist food writer. I write generally about culture and ideas and science. But a couple of years ago, I did write one book about food. That one, You Aren't What You Eat. And this is about the elevation of food into a vehicle for competitive signaling. Food as a vehicle for being smug and holier than thou. Hipster foodies, what I like to call foodists, people with food prejudices that they insist on displaying to others. So it's about people using food and Instagrams of food to show that they're more discerning, they're more gastronomically adventurous, or more artistic, or more spiritually pure than the great unwashed masses. In an age that has lost its trust in religion and politics, chefs are now our spiritual gurus, and there are lifestyle coaches. Food has become a secular religion. Cookbooks address metaphysical questions of happiness and togetherness, and celebrity chefs are the gurus. And fancy food has become the primary example in our age of what the great writer Thorstein Veblen called conspicuous consumption. I'm sorry you can't see the second word in that slide, but it was quite hurriedly done. Anyway, conspicuous consumption was his term for buying flashy stuff that you don't really need in order to signal to other people that you're wealthy enough. And when we do this with food, obviously the meaning of consumption is very literal. Strangely enough, me being sarcastic about all this did not stop it happening. So years later, according to the most recent surveys, the average British person now spends 5 hours a week watching food programs or reading food books. As Martin put it very nicely, it's become this great spectacle of masturbation. 5 hours a week watching TV programs about food, but only 4 hours a week cooking. And if you walk past a bookshop in London, this is the kind of thing you'll see. Look at all these books. Dopamine Diet, My Low-Carb Stay Happy Way to Lose Weight. Goop Clean Beauty, we've heard about Gwyneth Paltrow from Ruth. Lose Weight Well, all this sugar-free in a hurry, blood sugar diet recipe book. What is all this stuff? It is described by a relatively new word for an obsession with healthy eating, and that is the word orthorexia. Orthorexia comes from the Greek orthos, meaning straight or correct, like orthopedics or orthodontists. So orthorexia is a proposed eating disorder by this guy, Stephen Bratman, who used to be a cook and organic farmer, and then got worried about the fact that people were paying too much attention to trying to make their food as healthy as possible. So he writes, where the bulimic and anorexic focus on the quantity of food, the orthorexic fixates on its quality. All three give food an excessive place in the scheme of life. Sure, it's great to eat healthy food, and most of us could benefit by paying a little more attention to what we eat. However, some people have the opposite problem. They take the concept of healthy eating to such an extreme that it becomes an obsession. I call this state of mind orthorexia nervosa, literally fixation on righteous eating. More recently, Bratman has proposed a set of formal diagnostic criteria for whether somebody might have orthorexia, and one of them is this: an obsessive focus on healthy eating as defined by a dietary theory or set of beliefs whose specific details may vary, marked by exaggerated emotional distress in relationship to food choices perceived as unhealthy. Weight loss may ensue, but this is conceptualized as an aspect of ideal health rather than as the primary goal. If that sounds troubling, it's even more troubling that people in their millions are being encouraged to take this kind of attitude to their food by the newest craze in food media, as B mentioned yesterday, clean eating. Clean eating, this is a few pictures on Instagram. There are now more than 28 million photos on Instagram tagged with hashtag clean eating. The most righteous thing you can do nowadays is to eat clean, and it's the subject of many best-selling books, and to show how mainstream it has become, I give you this, the KFC Clean Eating Burger. I don't know what it's actually made of, and I don't think I really want to. It doesn't look appetizing, but I love the name of Figgy Poppleton Rice. It's just a brilliant, she made in collaboration with her. I didn't look her up because I didn't want to be, it's kind of nice to think she's fictional. Anyway, that's the KFC cleaning version. Now, so eating clean is not just about scrubbing your potatoes. It's about avoiding a lot of food. You should apparently avoid gluten. You should avoid peanut butter because it gives you cancer, apparently. And the clean eating gurus avoid the term diet. You're not allowed to use the term diet. Instead, it's all about lifestyle or wellness or even getting the glow, which doesn't mean eating radioactive material, because I think that would count as dirty eating. So the aspiration to clean eating means avoiding anything that is a toxin, or anything that is junk, or anything that is processed, even though obviously if we cook food, we're processing it chemically to start with. There's no getting away from processed food unless you eat a kind of weird raw diet, which will be very unhealthy. One of these books, The Naked Diet by Tess Ward, replaces conventional chapter headings with these feel-good words: pure, raw, stripped, bare, nude, clean, and detox. What exactly do these words mean? We'll come back to some of them later. But the roots of orthorexia go back further than the latest fad of clean eating, because I think orthorexia really starts in our age with the rise of the celebrity nutritionists. One of them, a notorious one in Britain, at least, is called Gillian McKeith. Now, you can tell this is an old edition of her book because it says Dr. Gillian McKeith on the cover. She was eventually persuaded by the advertising standard authorities to stop calling herself doctor because she didn't have any kind of advanced postgraduate degree, but she had a certificate in nutrition from a distance learning college somewhere in America. So I just call her Gillian McKeith. She sold over 2 million books with titles like You Are What You Eat, The Plan That Will Change Your Life, see how it's all about lifestyle aspirations. The philosophy, if you can call it that, in books like this, is that anything that's wrong with you must be caused by something in your diet. If you have an anxiety disorder, that's because you've got a magnesium deficiency. If you've got backache, you should avoid aubergines because they may promote congestion in the kidneys. The thing about being a nutritionist is you don't need any scientific qualifications to call yourself a nutritionist. And we have a great writer in England called Dr. Ben Goldacre, who, in his argument, is that nutritionists can't satisfy themselves with what the scientifically reliable, healthy eating advice is, because we all know what that is, and it doesn't change. It's just eat a lot of vegetables, blah, blah, blah. So the nutritionists kind of have to, they're on this treadmill of having to make up stuff to continue to sell books. They have to manufacture complication, Goldacre says. And here we have Gillian McKeith. She tells us that liver stagnation may be a cause of depression, as might food sensitivities. And she's one of the people who promotes this idea that there are more and more food sensitivities in daily life, and they're the root cause of many, many modern ills. According to her, they're a 21st century epidemic. She even claims to be able to help people who are HIV positive. This is from one of her books. It's probably worthwhile getting tested for food intolerances if you are not sure which foods affect you. See www.gillianmckeith.info for a home food intolerance testing kit. Yes, once you read her book, you could go to her website and buy a kit to test for food intolerances. And it tests for 113 foods that one might apparently be intolerant to, including apples, parsley, vanilla, chicken, and hops. She also hates coffee, which to my mind is a sign of a crazy person. The thing is, the kits she was selling had no scientific basis to them either, and a House of Lords commission talked about them in 2007 and said, it was worried that they were unregulated, and one medical expert told them that the kits were a waste of money and moreover liable to leave patients on diets that were inadequate. Of course, we know that there are some real food intolerances. There's lactose intolerance. People who have celiac disease really can't eat gluten. But McKeith conflates intolerances with what she calls sensitivities and allergies, and says that you might have a food intolerance if you regularly experience any of the following symptoms, including anxiety, fatigue, itching, headaches, nausea, and tiredness. If you read one of her books, you will have all those symptoms at once by the end. Another celebrated modern nutritionist is this guy, Patrick Holford, who wrote, this also sold millions, the Optimum Nutrition Bible. Optimum living made easy, not just optimum eating, optimum living. And by the way, it's, on the subject of food as religion, so many of these books are called Bibles. There's the Food Bible, McKeith wrote a Food Bible, there's a Baby Food Bible, there's a Whole Food Bible, a Gluten-Free Bible, a Party Food Bible, and a Spicy Food Lovers Bible. Anyway, according to Patrick Holford, you can choose to be healthy through eating the proper foods, so if you get sick, it's your fault. He actually writes, most disease is the result of suboptimum nutrition. The strategy, then, is to worry the reader into a kind of paranoia about their health by describing perfectly normal experiences as symptoms of bad nutrition. Maybe you find it hard to get up in the morning, or maybe you have bouts of anger or apathy. Some might say that's just the human condition, but Patrick Holford says, no, you may have an adrenal hormonal imbalance. And naturally, this warrants investigation by a nutritionist. And conveniently, Patrick Holford will sell you a bottle of antioxidant supplements to cure everything. Remember those chapters in the clean eating book that are like pure, raw, stripped, naked, detox? Detox is one of these words, again, for which there's really no scientific evidence. The reason we have a liver and kidneys is to get the bad stuff out and eject it. The idea of detox precedes clean eating, but it's a fundamental component of it because it's a sort of ritual purification, the sort of modern equivalent of putting on a hair shirt for a month. The problem is that, of course, it doesn't do anything. If you ask an expert, rather than a nutritionist, if you ask a dietitian, he'll say something like, there is nothing we can eat which will improve liver and kidney function. You can't detoxify yourself by eating special things. And this is dangerous because last month there was a paper somebody reported there was a paper in the British Medical Journal. A 47-year-old woman was admitted to hospital. She'd been having seizures brought on by low sodium levels in her blood, and this was because she'd been undergoing a herbal medication detox, along with drinking vast amounts of water, green tea, and sage, which would make anybody sick. Anyway, Dimple Thakrar, the British Dietetic Association chairman, says, it frustrates me when people bang on about detox because it can actually cause harm. The evidence suggests that by following a so-called detox, especially ones involving fasting, you can damage liver enzyme activity and therefore damage your body's ability to detoxify itself. So much for detox. It probably does make some people feel better because the placebo effect is very powerful. And anyway, a detox is usually only temporary, so it's difficult to do any really lasting harm, even if it won't actually do you any good. Now, the obsession with clean eating in our day, and orthorexia in general, how to eat correctly, they seem a very modern obsession. They seem to be all tied up with modern obsession with food as a lifestyle choice. But in fact, they've come around before. As Ruth mentioned, The Jungle, Upton Sinclair's novel earlier. And in this book, published in 1906, there's this erudite character called the Swede, who's maybe half mad. At one point, he foresees the invention of the washing machine, which did actually come true. And at one point, he mentions a man called Horace Fletcher, the inventor of the noble science of clean eating. He studied the composition of foodstuffs and knew exactly how many proteins and carbohydrates his body needed. And by scientific chewing, he said that he tripled the value of all he ate, so it cost him 11 cents a day. Now, when I read this, I just thought this was satire. Turns out there was a guy called Horace Fletcher who became known as the Great Masticator. He wasn't actually a dietitian or a doctor. He was an art dealer. But when he managed to lose a lot of weight himself by chewing all his food until it was basically soup, he decided to promote this message far and wide. His slogan was, "Nature will castigate those who don't masticate." He thought if you swallowed solid chunks of food, they would be converted by bacteria in the colon into poisons. So he said that each mouthful of anything you eat should be chewed exactly 32 times. Naturally, there was no good evidence for any of this. So we see that this idea that there is a perfectly clean way to eat that can protect us from all ills is something that has come up in the past and continues to come up now, even though it's based on make-believe. So it qualifies as what I call a zombie idea. This is a concept from my most recent book, Rethink. Now, a zombie idea is an idea that should be dead because it's been refuted. And nonetheless, it's still sort of shambling around like a zombie. It seems to be impossible to murder definitively. One of the most surprising zombie ideas around today, for example, is there are a lot of people on the internet who sincerely believe that the Earth is flat. Now, you might have thought, like the rest of us, that this was refuted not just when Columbus sailed to America, but actually, the Greek philosophers had lots of good arguments as to why the world must be spherical. People haven't seriously thought the world is flat for a very long time. Nonetheless, there are very elaborate theories on the internet that the world actually looks like this. You've got the sun and the moon as kind of spotlights. You've got this disc-shaped Earth, and the white ring around the outside is what the man wants you to believe is the continent of Antarctica, but actually it's just a giant wall of ice around the edge of our disk planet, which keeps everything from falling off. This is a massive conspiracy theory, of course, because NASA and world governments and everything else have conspired to keep the truth from us. They faked the moon landings. Everyone's trying to convince us that the world is round. I mean, I don't know exactly why, what they stand to gain from it, but anyway, that's the idea. So that's a zombie idea. And the zombie idea of clean eating also involves conspiracy thinking. For instance, one of the top clean eating books is this, Honestly Healthy Cleanse by Natasha Corrett. We see again that cleanse has this idea of purification, spiritual purification as well as physical purification, and is honest. So, who could doubt it? Now, Natasha Corrett's scientific inspiration for this book is an American nutrition writer called Robert Young, who wrote this book, The pH Miracle: Balance Your Diet, Reclaim Your Health. According to him, you should only eat alkaline foods. Now, Natasha Corrett, who's inspired by this, alkaline recipes, you see, she writes in her book that Robert Young's work is sadly not recognized by the medical establishment. Why isn't it? Perhaps, she writes, because giant pharmaceutical companies wouldn't be able to make any money out of doctors prescribing vegetables. Yes, so it's a giant conspiracy of big pharma refusing to recognize this guy's work. Is that why it's not recognized? No, not really. It's not recognized because there's no evidence for it. Young is actually reviving another zombie idea from a 19th century French physician called Antoine Béchamp. Now, Béchamp on the left, he thought that all illness arose from within the body. On the right, we have Louis Pasteur, famous for the germ theory, who showed that illness arises from bacteria outside the body coming into the body and causing infection, and we all now know this to be correct. Nonetheless, Béchamp was basically forgotten, but then he was revived as a zombie idea by this guy, Robert Young. The idea was refuted, killed, and yet here it still is. This is Robert Young, the modern-day Béchamp. He's drinking one of his own weird green alkaline concoctions there. This is a picture from a very good BBC Horizon documentary on the whole idea of clean eating that was recently shown. You know, if you can maybe get it on the internet here anyway, it's well worth a look. So Robert Young actually believes that red blood cells, if the pH balance of your blood is incorrect, that red blood cells will turn into bacteria and infect you from inside. That's what he writes in his books. So the presenter of this documentary, who's a medical doctor called Giles Yeo, went to interview him at his ranch and asked him why, for instance, in his books, Young called himself a world-renowned microbiologist, even though he has never published any peer-reviewed research in microbiology. And Young's answer, well, he kind of bats that away, but he says something quite extraordinary later on in the documentary. He says, all sickness and disease can be prevented by managing the delicate pH balance of the fluids of the body. All sickness and disease. Amazing, huh? I mean, brilliant if true, but is it true? No, it's not true. In fact, as Giles Yeo explains to the audience, blood has a slightly alkaline pH, And the medical consensus is nothing you eat is going to change it. But Robert Young, even so, he actually invited cancer patients to stay at his ranch and pay tens of thousands of dollars for alkaline treatment. He's currently being sued and facing jail time for practicing medicine without a license. This is why we should take orthorexia seriously, because it's so often based on pseudoscience and can be actively harmful. It is food as fake news. Does truth matter? Yes, it does, if the opposite can make you sick or actually kill you. The people who sell the unscientific books and videos that promote clean eating and orthorexia in general are cynically preying on the sick and vulnerable. Patrick Holford, who we met earlier, in his New Optimum Nutrition Bible, he says that vitamin C is better at treating HIV than the antiretroviral drug AZT. He says that possible culprits for autism include diet, vaccinations, and digestive disorders. And he sort of vaguely says that cancer can be cured by eating correctly. This is not just silly, it's the kind of advice that can kill people who believe it. Increasingly, in Britain, people who specialize, a consultant who specializes in eating disorders in London said to a reporter that she's seeing more and more patients who have given up certain food groups based on advice they have read online about clean eating. And she's used to hearing this term more and more these days as a way of justifying a particular weird diet. And earlier this year, I think, the English charity Sense About Science, said that the parents were risking leaving their children malnourished by restricting their diets in order to deal with perceived health problems. A decade ago, of 969 children in the Isle of Wight, a third of them were thought by their parents to have food allergies, but in fact only 5% had food allergies. So we have this problem of parents reading all this advice and then cutting useful foods out of their children's diets because they must have food allergies, because that must be what's wrong with them. No doubt sometimes this is true, but it's become so fashionable that it's actually harming children and making them malnourished. And here are some more of these books. None of this is to say, of course, that we shouldn't take some care over what we eat. Eating more of some things and less of others is bound to improve our well-being. But this pseudo-medical attitude to food in clean eating and orthorexia is going to give you an unrealistic confidence in your ability to control fate. And this confidence actually is the whole attraction. One nutritional therapist said to a reporter from The Guardian, there are a lot of things in this world we can't control. I find it really empowering that I can control my health and the way I feel through what I eat. And Gillian McKeith says, your health really is in your hands and in your kitchen. And look at the titles of these books: Fern Cotton, Cook Happy, Cook Healthy, Tom's Daily Plan, Recipes for a Happier, Healthier You. So you can control your health, you can become happy just by following the right kind of restrictive diet. And taken to its logical extreme, you get How Not to Die. Seriously? If you just eat the right kind of stuff, you won't die. And if you do die, it's your fault. The problem is that this is not just cheerful nonsense because of the implication when you turn the argument around. If eating the right stuff ensures you're going to be healthy, then if you get sick, it must be your fault. It must be your fault because you didn't eat correctly. The idea that illness is always an individual's fault is another zombie idea. It was one of the ideas behind so-called Christian Science movement in the 19th century, which said that all disease and illness were the wages of sin. So nutritionism, as Ben Goldacre writes, is really a manifesto of right-wing individualism. You are what you eat, and people die young because they deserve it. They choose death because they eat junk food, and they're ignorant and they're lazy. But you choose life, and that's why you're healthy, and that's why you're never going to die. If you die, you just weren't eating cleanly enough. The French philosopher Michel Foucault said in a 1983 television interview that in modern times, sex had replaced the ancients' focus on diet as a means of defining oneself. That didn't last long. Apparently now diet is back on top and we seem to have forgotten about sex. Of course eating well can improve your health, but it can't stop you from dying. nor can it guarantee happiness. As Steve Bratman, the coiner of the word orthorexia, puts it in one of his Do I Have Orthorexia questionnaires, you might have it if you agree with this statement: my personal sense of peace, happiness, joy, safety, and self-esteem is excessively dependent on the purity and rightness of what I eat. And that's what all the clean eating literature says to the millions of people who buy their books. That's what it's trying to persuade them. Thankfully, there is already a bit of a backlash against clean eating in the form of dirty food, stuff like this. Now, the answer isn't necessarily to eat that 3 times a day either, but maybe we can all be a bit more Aristotelian and find a happy medium, moderation in all things. The dream of clean eating, some of the main clean eating advocates now, actually, by the way, are saying, oh no, you really used the word clean eating in the first place. No, I'm not part of that fad. But many of them were. But it seems to be dying down slightly, but will it ever go away? I don't think it will, because it's just the latest iteration of this zombie idea that comes up again and again. The idea that you can control everything in your life through what you put in your body is centuries, if not millennia old. So it's just going to keep coming around again. Here's a guy who knows a bit about fake news. Funnily enough, I don't think that's a KFC clean eating burger. I think it's just a standard piece of KFC chicken. Funnily enough, this picture caused a furore on the internet through people saying, duh, who eats KFC with a knife and fork? As if that's the most shocking thing about Donald Trump. Anyway, but now that this was on the campaign trail in November, and he posted it to Twitter, he's a man of the people. He eats KFC, and, like the fact that he has tomato sauce with his steak, as Ruth mentioned earlier, that's not a reason to despise his supporters. But, if, now that Donald Trump is in power, we all live in this world of seemingly, increasing political and economic instability, orthorexia is really comforting. Because if you can maintain your health and happiness by careful attention to what you eat, then you're in control, and what this guy does doesn't really matter. You can get the glow, you can improve your energy levels, skin, and mindset, thanks to this kind of stuff. Why should you worry about what's going on in the outside world if you can nourish yourself from the inside out and improve your mindset and generally get the glow? Well, the problem is that clean eating or any kind of orthorexia is bound to lead to disappointment and self-blame when inevitably we do get sad or we do get ill. And orthorexia is not just a personal disorder, it's a whole industry, because there are people writing these books that sell in the millions, telling people that they should do this. So it's less a religion than a very profitable cult, a self-help cult based on nothing but pseudoscience. So the orthorexia industry, to sum up in a moral, the orthorexia industry is the Scientology of gastronomy. And to defend the truth, I think all we need to do, really, is to work harder at conveying the message that food is not about being immortal, it's not about being fashionable, it's not about photographing your plate. We should redefine eating correctly as focusing on pleasure and conviviality. Thank you.
¿Alguien tiene una pregunta? Como tenemos el coffee encima, si alguien quiere una pregunta que sea rápida y nos vamos a tomar un café. No, creo que son mayores las ganas del café que de seguir. A ver, ¿aquí tienen una pregunta? ¿No? Ok. ¿Sí? Vale.
I have a quick question, actually.
Sure.
And it's very interesting, the point of view on orthorexia, but what's the relationship that it has with actually eating disorders like bulimia and anorexia that are also clearly related to food? Orthorexia takes some of the fear to food that it's basically the base for those eating disorders that are also part of the cult.
The guy who coins the term basically says, he's getting increasing attention for this idea. He says, it's, comparable to, or becoming comparable to, the eating disorders we know about, such as bulimia and anorexia and nervosa, because it's another it's another relationship with food that is not healthy, because if you cut too much out of your diet and you get a lot of emotional stress about eating things you think are impure, you know, basically one of the criteria for any disorder is whether it causes you excessive distress in your daily life. And the relationship with food that people who are obsessed with clean eating have, I think, is one of spending too much time and energy and too much anxiety on stuff that isn't even true. So, I mean, it's up to psychiatrists to say whether they think they want to treat this as a real eating disorder going forward and put it in the next edition of the DSM-6 or whatever. But in the meantime, I think Bratman's idea is just a useful way of thinking about the weird relationship that people have with strange diets right now.